In 2012, the US economy collapsed. The population became unemployed, crime reached alarming numbers, and prisons became increasingly overcrowded. However, this situation has proved to be an opportunity for private corporations, which have taken over the prisons to make a profit. In one of them, located on Terminal Island, prisoners are tested in fights broadcast on the internet and which have become the new sensation of the moment. Despite its success, the public soon tired of the physical combat and demanded something new. So, 8 years later, another game was created, where inmates fight each other to the elimination, but this time in super-equipped cars, in what became known as Death Race. One of them is taking place right now, where a masked driver, Frankenstein, known as Frank, is trying to maintain his lead in the race. Behind him, however, is Joe, a driver famous for eliminating competitors with his huge machine guns. Frankenstein's co-driver, Case, warns him that the car is already out of ammunition and the rear protection won't withstand the shots for long. Even so, the driver says that they need to win this race, so he tells Case to release the car's protection. As she does so, the huge iron plate begins to bounce across the road and hits Joe's car, removing the passenger seat with the impact. Even so, he doesn't give up and continues the chase against Frankenstein, who now has his car completely exposed. The finish line is getting closer and Joe prepares to fire the bazooka attached to the roof of his vehicle. Seeing that there is no escape, Frankenstein orders Case to flee and she triggers the ejection seat, being thrown out of the car and saved by the parachute. Joe then fires the rocket and hits Frankenstein's car, which, despite everything, has crossed the finish line first. Far away, in a metal factory, worker Jensen Ames finishes his last day at work and goes to collect his paycheck. However, a SWAT battalion arrives on the scene and starts attacking the rebellious workers. Jensen prefers not to intervene, but when one of the policemen attacks his friend, he goes up against the agent, disarms him and helps the workers face the SWAT team. Later, Jensen returns home and, despite being injured, he meets his wife Susie again and the two have a romantic reunion. However, the couple soon have to interrupt the moment because their newborn daughter, Piper, is crying in the bedroom. Jensen goes to see his daughter and leaves Susie in the kitchen, but when she turns around, she is confronted by a masked man. Unfortunately, when Jensen returns, his wife is unconscious and, in a surprise attack, the intruder knocks him to the ground and flees the scene. Before leaving, the guy looks in his victim's direction and makes a gun gesture with his hand, just to provoke him. The blow knocks Jensen unconscious, but minutes later he is woken up by two policemen, their guns drawn and accusing him of murder. When he looks at Susie, she is mortally wounded and in Jensen's hand is a bloody knife. The crime was plotted to make him the prime suspect and, after 6 months, Jensen is sentenced to life imprisonment and taken to Terminal Island Prison. There, as well as being tortured by the second-in-command, Agent Ulrich, he is taken to a cell where he meets 3 unfriendly inmates. It doesn't take long for a fight to break out, but to Ulrich's surprise, Jensen finishes them all off at the same time. The next morning, more problems arise when, at mealtime, a group of inmates, known as Aryan Brotherhood, approach the newcomer. Their leader, Pachenko, accuses Jensen of murdering his own wife, causing the inmates to become even more inflamed. The leader then sets out to attack Jensen, but he dodges the blow and knocks the guy and his henchmen out using the food tray. The fight is soon interrupted by Officer Ulrich, who takes Jensen to the prison's leader, Warden Hennessy. Despite the confusion, the director admires the newcomer's courage and says she was impressed by his record, especially in car races. She then proposes a deal: take on the identity of Frankenstein, the favorite race driver eliminated by Joe in the last race. In return, if he wins, he can have his longed-for freedom, but if he refuses, he'll spend the rest of his life in solitary confinement. With no other choice, Jensen accepts and Hennessy takes him to the workshop to introduce his mechanics, Gunner, Lists, and the leader, known as Coach. Afterwards, the trio show the driver their car, a Mustang V8 equipped with machine guns, nitro and rear protection, called the Tombstone. In addition, the car has oil, smoke and napalm for defense, which are triggered by the vehicle's interior panel. With the vehicle presented, it's time to explain the rules of the race. It consists of 3 phases. In the first 2, the main objective is to survive and eliminate as many competitors as possible, and in the third, the winner will be the one who crosses the finish line first. The pilots will have assistants on the tracks, who will be responsible for giving tips and triggering the attack and defense mechanisms. Finally, Lists names the competitors Jensen has yet to meet: 14K, a member of a Chinese triad, Grim, the psychopath, and Colt, a former NASCAR driver. Also in contention will be Pachenko, whom Jensen already knows well, and of course Joe, who has just arrived on the scene with his gang. He asks about Frankenstein, without suspecting that the pilot has been eliminated and his replacement is right in front of him. However, on Hennessy's orders, everyone keeps this information secret and Jensen warns that Frank will soon meet Joe at the race. The guy then leaves and soon after, 2 more prisoners are brought in on a van. Jensen notices that they are wearing GPS bracelets and remembers that his wife's eliminator wore one of these on his right hand. Before he can think about it, he is forced to turn his attention to the race training. Days later, the big moment finally arrives and, before going to the track, Jensen receives the Frankenstein costume, ring and mask from the director. With all the pilots in place, it's the turn of his beautiful assistants to show up, including Case. She is already aware of the situation and introduces herself to Jensen, who receives permission to remove the mask inside the car, as the windows are mirrored. After that, the cars take up their positions, the drivers start their engines and, with the start signal, they set off at full speed. As expected, the veterans don't forgive the race's favorite driver and do everything they can to hit Frankenstein's car, causing him to lose positions. However, Case gives Jensen a shortcut and he regains first place, making Joe even angrier. The race became fierce between the 2 drivers and Joe pushed Jensen's car off the track. Again, Case shows another shortcut and the driver follows her lead, retaking the lead and going through the first lap. From there, the prison warden releases the arming and protection of the cars through triggers on the road in the shape of a sword and a shield. However, in addition to these, there are also triggers in the shape of skulls, which activate traps under the tracks. To the misfortune of one of the drivers, Grim pushes him into the skull drive and suddenly a blockade appears, armed with several pointed spears. The car ends up being hit hard, but not satisfied with that, the director makes the blockade crush the vehicle, along with its pilot. The race continues, with Joe advancing towards Grim and firing his machine guns at him. However, the pilot retaliates by activating the oil mechanism, causing Joe's vehicle to skid on the track and lose control. With this victory, Grim becomes confident and uses his machine gun against a driver ahead, but he counters by pouring slugs on the track. As a result, the tires on Grim's car are punctured and he begins to overturn violently on the road. 14K, who is right behind him, fires a missile to escape the crash, causing the vehicle to bounce off a sign. Grim miraculously survives the crash, but his celebrations are short-lived as Joe rejoins the race and ruthlessly runs him over. The dispute becomes even more intense and Jensen finally gets past one of the triggers and activates his machine gun. However, it's jammed, forcing Case to climb out of the window and try to fix it with a wrench. At the same moment, the helper from another vehicle climbs through the opening in the roof and starts firing a machine gun at Case. Jensen then swerves his car to get her out of his sights, but Joe also appears, firing at them. Luckily, Case manages to repair the machine gun in time and the 2 of them speed off to maintain their lead and complete another lap. Jensen then passes a defense trigger and asks Case to activate the mechanisms, but for some reason neither the oil, napalm or smoke are activated. Seeing this, Coach realizes that the same thing happened in Frankenstein's last race and finds it very suspicious. To make matters worse, Colt is right behind and fires his .50 caliber machine gun, leaving the rear protection of Frank's car increasingly damaged. Unable to use his defense mechanisms, Jensen asks Case to release the napalm cylinder and sit on his lap. Despite the strange request, she obeys and then the pilot throws the cylinder through the ejection seat, causing it to crash into the roof and pour the flammable liquid into Colt's car. Jensen then hands the cigarette lighter to Case, who throws it at Colt's vehicle, causing it to burst into flames. The driver loses all control while being burned alive and is finished off by Joe, who runs over the car and flips it over. Despite this maneuver, the race isn't over yet and Jensen soon finds himself side by side with Pachenko. The guy then makes a gun gesture with his hand, which the driver immediately recognizes as the same one his wife's eliminator made before fleeing. As a result, Jensen is distracted from the race and Joe takes the opportunity to crash into his car. As a result, the driver's car is almost destroyed and he finishes the race in last place. Soon after, Jensen takes the vehicle back to the workshop and Coach, along with Lists and Gunner, inspect what happened to the defense system. However, when they test the oil, they realize that the mechanism is working normally and begin to suspect that it was Case who didn't trigger them during the race. At the same time, Director Hennessy, who was unhappy with the outcome of the race, summons Jensen to her office. When he gets there, he tells her that he won't be driving anymore because he's discovered that one of the drivers is his wife's murderer and he suspects that the director was the mastermind behind the crime. Despite these accusations, the director decides to show her authority by showing Jensen a photo of Piper. She warns him that if the pilot gives up, his daughter will be adopted by a couple and will be told that her father eliminated her own mother. Enraged, Jensen approaches the principal's desk, unaware that underneath it, Hennessy has a shotgun pointed in his direction. Fortunately, he just takes the photo of his daughter back and leaves, agreeing to continue on the race. The next day, Jensen goes to help the team repair the vehicle, but his attention soon turns to Pachenko, who is passing through the workshop. The driver decides to make amends for his wife's elimination, but ends up being lured into a trap, with Pachenko's henchman hanging him with a chain. The leader starts hitting Jensen and decides to finish him off with a heavy wrench. But before he can deliver the final blow, the man is struck down by Lists, who has come to save his colleague and stuck a pen in Pachenko's back. However, the guy doesn't let this go to waste, and as well as knocking Lists to the ground, he crushes his hand and threatens to eliminate him right there. Just then, Jensen manages to reach a sharp piece of iron, shoves it into the foot of one of the henchmen and finishes him off with a fire extinguisher. The other henchman tries to attack him, but Jensen defends himself and throws the man's face against an iron support. Now all that's left is Pachenko, who tries to attack his rival from behind, but he dodges him, counters with punches and throws him into the shelves. With his wife's eliminator on the ground, Jensen intends to take revenge by eliminating him with a car exhaust. Pachenko begs for clemency and confesses that it was he who broke into Jensen's house and eliminated Susie, but he did it on Hennessy's orders and with Ulrich's help. Even so, Jensen doesn't intend to spare him, but before he can do anything, he is hit by a taser, fired by Ulrich. The officer warns him that if the two of them want to settle the score, they'll have to do it in the race, because the audience is looking forward to it. More days pass and it's time for the second stage of the race. Only 6 competitors remain, including Frankenstein, Joe, 14K and Pachenko, who are preparing for another round in their cars. The start signal is given and the cars speed down the track, but to everyone's surprise, Jensen remains stationary. Case and the team of mechanics are confused by this attitude, but soon the driver accelerates and continues at a moderate speed, with all the other racers in front of him. He then takes a shortcut through the tunnel and says that, before continuing, he's going to question Case about Frankenstein's elimination. He asks her if she was responsible for it and the young woman replies that she was forced by the prison warden to sabotage the defense system. However, her intention was only to prevent him from winning, but the driver didn't want to give up. Jensen questions why the director would give this order and Case says that she didn't want to lose her best driver and intended to keep him in the race for the rest of his life. That's also why Case had to sabotage the defense system in the previous race, so that Jensen could stay in the race indefinitely. Seeing that she was telling the truth, the driver decides to rejoin the race, accelerating the car to the maximum and overtaking 14K. With 1 lap completed, Jensen now sets off in Joe's direction and hits the back of his car, sending it crashing into a wall. With 2 of the front runners out of contention, the driver goes full throttle to catch up with Pachenko and the two start a tussle over the bridge. The opponents begin to push their cars against the iron bars, but Jensen manages to dodge and sees a defense drive ahead. However, he changes direction and heads for the attacker, as he doesn't want to let Pachenko get away again. The problem is that his opponent also passes the trigger and, with his machine guns activated, he fires at will at Jensen. What he didn't count on was that the pilot would make a surprise maneuver and accelerate in reverse, giving him the chance to fire his machine gun at Pachenko. The two of them drive down the road, shooting at each other, until Jensen turns the car around and tells Case to activate the smoke mechanism. This causes Pachenko to lose control and crash into a roadblock, causing the car to overturn. However, Jensen is still not satisfied and throws the car into reverse, hitting Pachenko with his car door. Finally, he puts on his mask, walks up to the guy and, in front of all the cameras, finishes him off by breaking his neck. This attitude serves as a direct message to Hennessy, but she responds by invoking her latest creation, the Dreadnought. It's a gigantic truck, armed with a machine gun, a tank, a flamethrower and an impenetrable iron shield. The monstrous vehicle emerges from a warehouse and begins to dispose of the drivers behind it, leaving only Jensen, Joe and 14K. Then, in order to attract the attention of the audience, the truck follows them into a tunnel and, using a chain of stilettos, it traps 14K's car and blows it up with a missile shot. Seeing that the Dreadnought is too strong to take on alone, Jensen contacts Joe on his communicator and asks for his help. Despite his pride, the pilot accepts and the two cars surround the huge truck, which continues to fire missiles, machine gun fire and flamethrowers. Despite this, the two vehicles overtake the Dreadnought and lure it into a skull trigger on the track. Thanks to this, the huge truck crashes right into the trap, destroying the cab and causing the cargo to jump forward. This strategy closes the race and leaves everyone impressed, including the inmates, who welcome Joe and Frankenstein as heroes. However, when he hears the driver's voice over the communicator, Joe suspects that it wasn't the real Frank, but Jensen, and intends to clear up the story. After the race, Hennessy realizes that the new Frankenstein could be very dangerous in the future. That's why she has Ulrich install a bomb under his car, so that in the final stage of the race, he doesn't cross the finish line. Meanwhile, in the workshop, Coach calls Jensen to show him something he discovered on the recording of Grimm's elimination. The two notice something on the track and ask Lists and Gunnar to get 2 more liters of fuel, but they don't tell them why. Jensen then goes to Joe's workshop, who, for once, doesn't like his presence and tells him to leave. The pilot, however, replies that Frank wants to talk to him because he has something important to tell him. More days pass and finally it's time for the third and final stage of the race. Joe is the first to appear on the track and his car is more equipped than ever, with 7 anti-aircraft missiles attached to the roof. As for Jensen, he's just finishing getting dressed when the prison warden appears before him. She shows him his signed release papers and assures him that if Jensen survives and comes out on top in the race, he'll be a free man. At the same time, Hennessy makes him an offer to continue as Frankenstein, as his skills have made the event such a success. She also tries to convince him that the best option for his daughter is to live away from him. This proposal gives Jensen pause for thought and he takes to the track in his Frankenstein costume and mask. The 2 drivers and their assistants get into their cars, the starting signal is given and the final stage of the race begins. Just ahead, there is a trigger for the attack weapons, but just as Jensen was about to cross, Hennessy tells him to deactivate it. Seconds later, she reactivates the trigger, so that Joe has his weapons activated and can begin the attack on his opponent. The pilot doesn't miss his chance and unloads his ammunition against the rear protection of the car, forcing Jensen to swerve. Further ahead, there is a defense trigger, but just as before, the director orders it to be deactivated again, giving Joe the advantage. Everything is going according to the director's plans and Joe is having fun shooting at his rival. The situation becomes increasingly critical as there are no triggers nearby and Jensen's car is becoming increasingly damaged. However, just as the previous Frankenstein did in his last race, Jensen orders Case to drop the tombstone to stop Joe. She obeys, but the driver already knows this strategy and easily dodges the huge iron plate. Now, with his car completely exposed, Jensen's only hope is to find a defense trigger. The director tells them to leave the trigger on this time, as it will keep the race suspenseful and attract even more spectators. However, Joe is not willing to lose and fires one of his missiles at the starter, destroying it completely. Jensen's team of mechanics become desperate, as all it takes is 1 missile shot at the car and it will be blown to pieces. Knowing this, Joe gets on the comms and tells his rival that it's time to end the race. He then fires 3 missiles at once, only for Jensen to dodge in time and they hit a wall of containers ahead. It turns out that this is the same place where Grimm was eliminated and Coach had noticed that on the other side of the containers was the bridge out of the prison. Knowing this, everything was planned by Jensen and Joe to escape from the island and the 2 pilots escape from the race. Seeing that she had been tricked, Hennessy ordered the transmission to be cut and ordered her officers to capture the fugitives. At the same time, she triggers the bomb inside Jensen's car, but moments before, Coach had found the explosive and removed it from the vehicle. This only increases the fury of the director, who sends a group of helicopters after the pilots. Despite fleeing, Case realizes that they won't escape the police, but Jensen shows her an extra device added to the vehicle and tells her to pull it out. As a result, the rear tank of the car, with the 2 liters of extra fuel that Jensen requested, is dumped on the road. One of the vehicles crashes into it, causing an explosion that causes the cars to lose control and create a blockage between themselves. Jensen and Joe have escaped the cars, but there is still a blockade at the front gate. The security guards fire their machine guns at the cars, but they manage to get through the gate easily. Now they have to escape from the helicopters, which start firing at the 2 vehicles. Jensen then orders him and Joe to split up and the director tells the helicopter pilot to give priority to Frankenstein's car. With that, Jensen puts her next part of the plan into action, jumping out of the car and letting Case drive the vehicle. She drives as far as she can, until the helicopters fire missiles, blocking all passage. All that's left is for Case to put on the Frankenstein costume and let herself be arrested, while Jensen and Joe flee through the wagons of a nearby train. Hours later, Ulrich tells the director that Frankenstein has been captured and the audience for the race was the biggest ever. No wonder they are already receiving letters and presents, with one of them being delivered by Ulrich. However, as soon as Hennessy opens the present, inside is the same bomb she had planted in Frank's car. It is soon revealed that Coach was the one who sent this gift and, without hesitation, he detonates the bomb, taking the director and her henchmen with him. 6 months after the last race, Joe and Frank are living in Mexico, fixing cars in a junkyard. Suddenly, a powerful vehicle pulls up and out of it emerges Case. Before the race, Hennessy had also handed in her release papers, as he expected the young woman to be eliminated, along with Frankenstein, by the bomb blast. Jensen is happy to see her again and introduces her to his daughter, Piper, with whom he has won custody. Now, alongside Case and Joe, Jensen has the chance to be the father Piper deserves and finally have a life away from all the violence. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below. And if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.